Welcome to the Movement Podcast. This show is all about movement. We tackle it from different angles, bring on guests, answer questions, go on a few tangents, and give practical advice, giving you guys a better idea of how you can optimize the human body to be the best it can be. Let me give you a preview of what's coming up in this episode. On today's episode, Gray and Lee sit down with their good friend, Dr. Greg Rose. Greg is a leading expert in fitness and movement and a founder of the Titleist Performance Institute, or TPI. Greg specializes in working with professional athletes with a focus in golf and baseball. In this episode, the guys discussed tips for you weekend warrior golfers out there, the science behind adding distance to your golf swing, and self-checking your mobility and movement when it comes to golf. They dive deeper for the movement pros, discussing mobility and hypermobility in pro golf and baseball, and how movement issues such as asymmetries can give some pro athletes an actual advantage. We also get an inside look at what athletes experience at TPI. We get into Chinese table tennis, rock concerts, and the athleticism of some frontmen, the importance of managing rest and recovery, and writing new golf swing patterns into your brain. We close with the craziest golf shot the guys have ever seen. So let's start today's Movement Podcast, powered by FMS.
What's up?
Dr. Rose.
Look at you guys. Wow.
Yeah, it's awesome to have Greg on. Greg's one of the foremost, I'll say it in front of my guests, foremost experts in fitness, golf fitness specifically, being at the TPI, Titleist Performance Institute.
All right, what's happening, boys?
How you doing, man?
Doing good, man. Doing good. So, Gray, you got a new shirt, I see.
Yeah, I did.
No, he didn't. That's the same shirt he's been wearing every day for the past. I think he
the
washes
FMS
it on
Simon
Friday.
Cowell.
He washes it on
Jobs had
Friday,
more than
Greg.
one black turtleneck, man. Just give me credit.
Exactly.
They're all new shirts. They're just the same.
I don't know if I believe that. I think it's the same shirt. He washes it once a week.
Did I get a text from you like a week ago? You were in Arkansas doing your farm project?
I was, man. You know me. I'm trying to be a redneck like you. It's been going on for like 5 years.
You've copied everything. You got the Ford F-150. You got the Kubota tractor. You got the little patch of land, not in California.
I just need the black cutoff shirt and the goatee and little mullet, and I'm good. I mean, I'm working on that.
Yeah. As soon as Target puts them on sale in the little boys aisle, I'll go grab you some.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
And make sure you tuck the shirt tail in, Greg. Shirt tail goes in.
No, there's a functional reason for that. People don't understand. I can get to my knife quicker because my shirt's tucked in.
It's the old Seinfeld episode. You want it tucked or no tucked? I like it tucked.
All right, so Lee, there's a rumor that you've been talking crap that you're the best golfer in the FMS crowd over there. That I heard Kiesel and Gray were saying that Lee's got a pretty good game. And my theory is that you just haven't really actually played with a real golfer yet. Does that hold true, you think?
Everything's relative, Greg. I am the best golfer in this room right now.
That I agree with. I agree with that.
So, I mean, it all depends on who you want to compare myself to. If you're saying best in the FMS community, as it is in Chatham, Virginia, yeah, I hold that title. The further you expand it out, man, we'll see. Kiesel, yeah, right. From day to day.
All right.
When's the last time
One of
you
these
played?
days, we're going to have our FMS golf tournament.
I do
we can all bring
believe
a partner.
Matt Moore, from what I understand, is a pretty solid golfer.
We can all bring a partner. We'll do that. You have no idea who I'm going to bring, but
Exactly.
There's a good chance you'll know him.
Greg, when was the last time you played? Are you playing at all?
I honestly, it's been a rough. This year has been rough. I have not played this year, which is shocking. Because going from someone who used to play all the time, used to be back in the day, used to be a scratch golfer. I'll tell you what's been getting in the way has been baseball. We've been doing the spring training, kind of crushed me this year, and then obviously COVID. But it's kind of interesting right now with all the stuff going on in the world. Golf is actually spiking right now, and because it's actually like the perfect social distancing sport, right? So we got all these people that have been
when I'm hitting out of the trees, it's pretty easy for me to social
you
distance.
guys are very social distance when you play, right? I get that, but it's actually. I was talking to one of the heads at Titleist yesterday, and it's amazing. The golf business is booming right now. So I'm sure there's a lot of weekend warriors out there that want some advice. Maybe we should talk some advice for weekend warriors.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, And I don't think, again, going back to our thing is, it's just good, solid advice for anybody. It doesn't have to be a golfer. It's to get out there and be active and start moving a little bit more. And
well, let me kind of get a little specific on like, hey, if you want to do some things to help your golf game, and let's say you've, forever you have, let's say the off season, you don't do anything, or you've been quarantined, you can't play, you can't do anything. What can you do now? Or how do I prepare myself to make this better? I go back to our model, right? Our model of how the human body works, this alternating pattern, mobile, stable, right? So, Gray, I think you and Mike Boyle kind of talked about this early in the days, that there are certain joints that love to move in 3 planes of motion, right? We call those mobile joints. And there are certain joints that just like to move in one direction, like your knee or the knuckle on your finger. Any of those joints that like to move in multiple planes are the joints that you should use when you play a rotary sport, like your hip, right? Your thoracic spine, your shoulder. So first and foremost, you want to be able to have the mobility in your hips, your spine, and your shoulders, and your wrist, if I had in there, to be able to move the golf club. Because it's really important. I think most weekend warriors, the biggest problem they have 2 problems: accuracy and power, right? The 2 things that matter. So let's talk about power first. If you want to hit a ball farther, you have to do either one of 2 things. You either have to push harder, so more force on the club, and that we can talk about all the strength training, stability, and things that you have to do to hit it farther, or you need more time to apply that force. So I think this is really important for anybody playing in rotary sports. If you want to move an implement, a bat, a club, a hockey stick faster, there's only 2 ways: increase the force you're applying, or the amount of time you're applying the force. So think of like golfers like John Daly. They take the club really far back. They have this incredibly long period of time to apply force. That's one way to hit it farther. The other way is just, you don't have to take it far back, but now you got to push harder. So if you want to hit it farther and you want to play better this year, you got to work on one of those 2 things: either applying more force, getting stronger, or giving me more distance, bigger swing, so that I have more time to apply the force. Now, getting that distance comes back to mobility, right? So the mobility, to me, the key things for weekend warriors is hip mobility, spine mobility, and shoulder mobility. If we can give you those things, instantly, most people are going to hit it farther. And I feel like a lot of people think all I got to do is just get stronger or stronger core. Well, if you have a stronger core, let's say they do some abs and glute work, but your hips don't move, your spine doesn't move, and your shoulder moves, well, now all you did is just made everything not move. And now you have to be the strongest person on the planet because you don't have enough time to apply the force. Does that kind of make sense?
It does, and it reminds me, you and I, it might have been a year ago, maybe 2 years ago, we're in the back of a room at a conference or an event, and somebody grabs the mic up front and goes for 45 minutes about mobility, flexibility, stability, motor control, coordination, and is making the water actually muddier than cleaner when we've got these 2 issues. And you and I said, what if we could just oversimplify this conversation for everybody? And the 2 words that emerged from that conversation were freedom and control. There's a reason that you're not doing X. And if your freedom is limited so much that your control is no longer an influence, then you got a mobility problem. And if you've covered the minimums of freedom and you're still having problems, then we can look at control. And everything you've done at TPI, we do at FMS, is to basically leave the professional and the client, the athlete, or the patient standing right there at a data sheet that says your freedom problem's bigger than your control problem. So only ask one question: how do I get more freedom of movement? Yep. Or your freedom's good enough and you're not controlling it well enough. And so between the Y balance test, the FMS, TPI screen, SFMA, we emerge at this constant battle we're fighting against freedom and control. And it's a real easy thing once you turn it to those. That I can't really press on control if we don't get a little more freedom, or we've got enough freedom, they should be controlling it better. And by looking at those, all these theories go out the window, and we can just bring the best exercise, best treatment, and best instruction to the situation, and then measure the baseline again.
Well, Greg, how do you tell someone what they need? I mean, how do you know that a person needs more mobility and a person needs, if they're just, because like you said, most everybody assumes they just got to get stronger.
Man, I wish there was a screen that we could use to figure this out. Well, you know what? I think it would be kind of appropriate to talk about. So first of all, obviously, most athletes get a movement screen done, right? But if is there something you can do at home? We should probably talk a little bit about like self-assessment, like moveprints or screening yourself. You guys want to talk about that for a sec?
Yeah.
So what we had noticed in the past, you'll like this, is we did a self-assessment at Titleist back in like 2004. We put on a website and we said, hey, just screen yourself, right? And based on your screen results, we'll give you some exercise recommendations. And one of the tests we had them do was the overhead squat, right? And you know from the data, from the millions of data that we've taken from FMS, the overhead deep squat, about 29% of the population can do a perfect overhead deep squat. So that means over 70% of the people out there have some problem in the overhead deep squat because it's checking, ankle, knee, hip, spine, shoulder. There's so many pieces it's checking. When we did our home assessment, we had 80% of the people said they passed the overhead deep squat. So immediately we said, all right, self-assessment sucks, right? That people can't do self-assessment. So I know, Gray, and I know myself, and we've been exploring on how to make self-assessment more reliable. And Gray, I know you've been working on this a ton. You want to talk about that for a second? I think that'd be appropriate here.
When Athletic Body and Balance was my first book, it came out in 2003, but I started writing it in 2001, and the charge was, we know you got a movement screen. Not everybody has access to that. And really, the whole point of self-screening is self-awareness. And never more than now have we had people who make assumptions about movement. If you grew up in an agricultural family, nobody ever needed to ask you, could you squat or climb? Those things happen working on a farm. They just do. So my dad, he said, I knew before I played high school athletics if I could jump on a 55-gallon barrel or not flat-footed. So there was all these little obstacles in our life that just informed us about our athleticism. You knew what kid you could get in a fight with and which one would be a good day to apply your running skills. And so I've really been thinking about this physical currency, the way we prize our physical self. And so we can talk to people about their movement now, and we can test their movement. And I've never seen a bigger discrepancy because a lot of people will come to me and define their activity by the few exercises they do, and then will think those exercises are a full nutritious diet of movement. And they're blown away when we movement screen them and they have 2 cans and 5 can'ts. And yet they're like, but I'm at the gym 3 days a week. And I'm like, and it's all about what you're working on, and what you're working on is changing, and look at all this stuff you're not working on. So it's always been fascinating to me to be able to give people a move. Like, there's a lot of people that think they can squat, but if I say hold your knees still, a lot of people can't touch their toes. So I start at that one and then work into there. And
well, I like even the ones like we experiment with, like put your feet together and squat. Right, like it takes away some of the variables, right, of how you can cheat, and it tells us it's either the BS detector. You can or you can't. You know what I mean?
And taking the movement question back to a binary yes no is something I'm passionate about, because maybe gets us nowhere. And as long as people think maybe, it'll turn into a yes for those who are glass half full, and it'll turn into a no for those who are half empty. And what movement screening has done, it's liberating, in fact, because some people aren't challenging themselves enough based on their freedom and control. And some people don't even know that is their biggest problem. They keep asking for a different workout or routine or stress.
And there's just multiple movements that have to get done in those certain positions. Like you said, feet together, squatting. Can you touch your toes without bending your knees that much? Can you rotate a certain way that you have to do in order to just be able to do your daily activities? And there's multiple ones. There's not just one thing. And I think that's where we landed. So
I would say, Lee, to answer your question, like if everybody's listening at home, you're a weekend warrior golfer and you're like, hey, do I have a mobility problem? I'll tell you mine. I'm sure, Gray, you probably had some different, but the 3 ones that I would check real quick is I put your feet together, keeping your feet together. Can you squat all the way down? Can you get your butt below your knees, right? So we call it ask the grass. Get all the way down. And once you're down there, can you take your hands and put your hands on the floor? If you can put your hands on the floor by your footprint without falling over, okay, that's a pretty good sign that you've got some pretty good ankle mobility, knee mobility, hip mobility, some spine. So that's the first thing I would check. Second thing I would check, like you just said, Lee, is toe touch. Keeping your knees straight, can you touch your toes? Just because golf is a bent over posture, to see like, hey, do you have the flexibility to hip hinge and be able to maintain that posture? And then the last one I would do as a self-assessment is get in front of a mirror, turn away from the mirror, so your back's to the mirror, feet together. And now just standing tall, we'll do one of our SFMA tests. You're going to rotate. Let's go as far as you can to the right and try and look at yourself in the mirror. if I'm standing with my feet together, standing tall, and I'm going to rotate back to look at the mirror behind me, if I'm rotating to the right, you should be able to see the front of your left shoulder. If you can't, or if you can't even see yourself in the mirror because you can't turn your head, there's a rotation problem. Those three real quick for golf will tell me if you have if there's some gross, obvious mobility problems.
Right.
Now, I'm not saying there's not stability involved there too, because there is, but that would be a
Greg, if you had those three pieces of information and they were limited, you would give them, hey, just do some more mobility work. And if they could do them, then the next, what you just rule out, well, now you need to focus on, as you put it earlier, strength or that push part of your swing.
Yep.
So,
then let me give you one other thing. I think right now it's really easy to videotape your golf swing too, right? So you can take your phone and film your golf swing. We can look at where the club is at the top of the backswing, right? So if the club gets the parallel, right? That's probably let me say two things. If the club gets the parallel and your hands, your lead hand, your left hand is above your head. So if you get to the top of the backswing, your lead hand, left hand, if you're a right-handed player, is above your head and the club gets the parallel, that's a pretty good sign that you've got enough ramp time to create force, or to apply force. If it's short of parallel, if your hand's below your head, that's another sign that there could be, we could actually give you some more time to apply more force with some mobility.
No, that's good. I think the one thing about self-screening is one thing we painstakingly do is not everybody has a camera system feedback. Not everybody has that. So we pick submission holds, squatting with your feet together and then trying to get your hands on the ground. That's a submission hold. And if anybody who knows mixed martial arts fighting, the submit is when you truly say, oh, if I don't stop now, I'll get hurt. That's really what a movement screen is. And every time you get to a cant in one of those obstacles, you could get hurt in that pattern simply because you can't do it.
Well, let me say one thing about that, because I think this is really cool to talk about, because a lot of golfers get pain, they get injured, right? And they want to know, like, hey, does it hurt? And this is something you taught me, Gray, and I think we need to do this more, is if I said to my golfers out there, and we said, all right, here's these three movements, right? Feet together, squat, touch your toes, and rotate right and left. Before you do that, if you ask the question, like you said, hey, ask the question, do you think you can do this? Yes or no? And do you think it would hurt, right? If you just ask yourself, do you think you can do it? If you say yes, that I could do it, and you say it wouldn't hurt, but now when you do the test, you can't do it and it hurts, I think you're the highest risk for injury, right? So I think your knowledge of your deficits is important for your longevity. So in other words, the number one reason adults get hurt, because they think they're still kids. They think they still have all these movements, right? So like a lot of people say to us, like, hey, if I fail the entire movement screen, am I higher risk of injury than somebody who passed the whole movement screen? Well, I would say, well, hold on, let's think about this differently. Is if you failed the movement screen but thought you were going to pass the movement screen, versus if I failed the movement screen but I knew I was going to fail the movement screen, the first guy's more likely to get injured, because if I get ones or like zeros on the entire FMS, I'm in pain in every movement, and I know I'm in pain, I usually don't do stupid stuff, right? So I don't get hurt. It's when I think I can do these things, and then I actually go test them and they're painful, I do stupid things, and that's the people who get hurt.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I think when we see the journeyman or the veteran pro athlete, we don't see a pristine body and we don't see the best movement screens in the world, but they know exactly, where their limits are, what they can do within this, and within the slot they still have, they're a formidable force, but they know exactly what they can and can't do, which is really the essence of coaching and training. It's teaching them self-regulation and self-management and knowing your state of readiness. And when you lose that, most athletes can tell you, this is not my day. And we could then do, and what I think the three of us have prided ourselves in is if you say it's not your day and we've got some work together, we can show you a number that agrees with you, meaning we're trying to be as close to what you're feeling as possible if what you're feeling is the truth. And if what you're feeling is not the truth, we're going to get you there. So.
And then whether it's an athlete or whether it's just anybody, any of us out there trying to be more active and do stuff, it's that awareness of where you are that is going to really allow you to, as you say, Greg, self-regulate.
Yep.
So, Greg,
are we done? Okay, cool.
Yeah, Greg.
Let me do one more thing. Can I say one thing real quick?
Yeah.
Just for my weekend warriors, one thing that so many golfers come in and they have all these movement problems, and we're working on these problems, and we realize that it was their clubs. And I just want to point this out, that a lot of times if you're not fit properly,
Leave it to the Titleist guy to say it's the clubs.
of course you got to be Titleist.
Come on.
But that's a given. But I'm saying, like, listen, if your clubs are the wrong length, if they're the wrong weight, it's amazing on how many movement dysfunctions you create to try and swing the wrong club versus your clubs fitting you. So no matter what clubs you have, just make sure they're fit for you, and it actually makes your movement patterns better.
No, and let me add something to that. Weight training in running shoes, riding a bike incorrectly, not knowing your swimming strokes, not knowing how to. Yeah, it's the equipment is sometimes the disadvantage because people have read more than they have sampled, and been instructed. So that's good advice.
All right, let's take a break. And when we come back, Greg and the guys go a lot deeper for the pros out there.
For over 30 years, Functional Movement Systems has been the leader in movement health. We've developed a system that bridges the gap between fitness, performance, and healthcare professionals. Our screen and assessment tools help pros set the course for their clients and patients and gets them moving well so they can continue to move often. The functional movement screen is the foundation of our system and checks vital signs in movement competency through patterns. From youth or professional athletics to the elderly population and everyone in between, the screen is your starting point. The presence of pain is a vital sign we consider in our system. The Selective Functional Movement Assessment, geared toward healthcare professionals, is the diagnostic assessment for individuals experiencing pain during movement or with the screen. Once proper treatment is administered by clinicians, the patients are cleared to resume regular activity. The screen is once again at play to set the movement baseline. But what's next? When an individual displays competency in the screen, it's time to advance to another level. The Fundamental Capacity Screen, which tests for fitness, performance, and capacity. The system identifies whether individuals warrant additional rehabilitation or corrective exercise, or if they're ready for performance-based activity. Decide what course is right for you and get started on your professional journey today.
But one thing I wanted to ask you guys, something I've gotten into over the last, month or so, is pretty much every Friday night, I've been starting to watch old concerts on YouTube. And you guys liking music, I wanted to kick this off and find out. So last week, I watched an old 1985 Van Halen concert on YouTube. And it was awesome.
1985, where was it at?
It was in Montreal.
Oh, Montreal. I was saying, because I'm pretty sure I went to a Van Halen concert around 1985.
No, wait. Was that Van Hagar or Van Halen?
It was Van Halen. It was
David Lee was still there in 85. Okay, I was trying to figure out when was the break. I'm telling you,
I could not believe what David Lee Roth could do to his body during this, and for that amount of time, just the stuff that he was doing. So my question to you boys is, who do you think you'd want to see right now in concert?
I saw him last year. I saw Aerosmith last year, but I saw
back in the day. Now,
back in the
Aerosmith is not Aerosmith when you go see him right now.
But I saw him in Miami back when I was in PT school, which was pre-90, and Steve Tyler, after about 45 minutes of doing whatever Steve does, from harmonica to dance around stage, did a tip up or a kip up, where basically you go back onto your hands, shove off your hands and land on your feet. And I'm thinking, do the calculation, he was at least in his 40s when he did that. I couldn't do that in my 20s. And there's a certain amount of athleticism that has to go with being a front man, I guess.
Are you saying like, if you could see anybody in time right now, or you're saying who would you see now that's current right now?
No. I wouldn't say current. I'd go back. Let's go back.
If you could see anybody, like even if they were dead.
Yeah.
Man, I'm a huge, we go to concerts almost every week.
That's why I asked. I want to kick it off because I knew that.
All right, I'll invite you. You want to go see Hendrix?
Of course.
Let's go. I mean, Lee said we could.
I would be all over that.
I would love that.
So, that would have been awesome. I'm trying to think like, man, if I could go back to see anybody,
The one thing
there's so many, man. Probably Led Zeppelin. I saw Robert Plant last year, and he was amazing. I would have loved to see Zeppelin in their prime. Would have been awesome. I'm a big classic rock guy.
Yeah.
So,
I think you might like that.
Leonard Skinner before the crash would have been a good show.
That'd be a good one too. But I'd still go with Zeppelin over them for sure. Man, who else would I do? Let's see. Now, if we're going way back, I'd love to see Elvis, man. I just want to be in the crowd.
Yeah. Elvis back then, back in his day, again, that's the thing, back in the day, because some of these guys now play forever. Aerosmith's still playing. I saw Kiss last summer, again, at that age, still doing what they do.
Dude, I saw Paul McCartney. I saw Paul McCartney 2 years ago. I mean, he's like 74, and he was still killing it, man. It's unbelievable what some of these guys can do.
But the one thing David Lee Roth did that was, I think, unreal, is he basically stood on one foot, grabbed his other foot, and held it in his hand and jumped around in a circle for like 30 seconds. And the amount of...
You've been thinking about this for a while, haven't you?
I mean, I was watching that. Well, I had a couple of beers too, so that probably played into me thinking that was crazy. But the amount of mobility... You
think he would have passed active straight leg raise? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah,
at least on one side.
But kind of bringing it back to your question, Greg, is in your world with the amount of mobility he had to do that. But then where does it come in where too much mobility is a problem? Because obviously in your world, dealing with professional golfers, I would imagine they've got tremendous amount of mobility. They've got to have it, right? But where do you draw the line?
I think everybody just assumes that these golfers are just, genetically gifted and have all this range of motion. Man, if that was true, they wouldn't need me. We spend all day trying to get these guys to keep moving. Now, I don't want to say there's guys like Adam Scott, like Adam is I don't think he's ever had to work on mobility. I think his whole training, his trainers and all the people around him were always trying to make him tighter because he really would fit the classification of hypermobility. But I mean, literally on one hand, I could probably name the amount of guys that were hypermobile. Most of the guys, if you see a hypermobility, and you guys know we've seen this, is like, let's say their shoulders are hypermobile. It's usually because the spine's hypomobile, right? So you have that adjacent area that's not moving. That creates the one unstable segment. Because you don't see a lot of, Cirque du Soleil type of hypermobility in professional sports too. Because like you said, too much can be a problem, right? You can have a stability problem. So, of course we look at these professional golfers and they can rotate. And I work obviously a lot in baseball as well. It even goes the other way. Like some guys will say, hey, look at these big guys like Mike Trout or Albert Pujols or something. And they're like, hey, man, they must not be able to move. But when you test these guys, they actually have great flexibility, but it's not excessive and it's the right amount. You know what I mean? And I think the more we learn about mobility, something I know Gray and I've talked a lot about is how, you obviously, you want to be able to, let's say golf, you want to be able to get that hip to shoulder separation, right? That's really important because it's kind of like preloading the muscles or doing that stretch shorten cycle. But part of that we're starting to learn, it's not just about the muscles, it's about the fascial system, right? And you can actually pre-stretch that fascial system and get this elastic energy from that fascial system. But if it's too loose and you can't get that little elasticity, then it definitely can be a problem. But I would tell you, like I said, the majority of great golfers on the PGA Tour and baseball players, they just have the right amount, right? So like I said, they're just, it's good. It's not excessive. It's definitely not hypo. But I rarely see hypermobile professional athletes. This is in my experience.
One of the things that I remembered as you were saying that, Greg, is we were in the gym at TPI, and I don't know if we were out there doing a show or a video or whatever, but you had one of your golfers in, and you and I were sort of still in the early phases of the SFMA. Now, we were teaching that basically on your platform before it even got popular on our platform. You came to me and said, we need an orthopedic assessment for golf. And we went around, both being clinicians first and then enthusiasts of the different sports we worked in second. And I'm like, no, we need a really good orthopedic screen, and there's no better sport to start it in and see it catch on in other places, baseball, soccer, and stuff like that. But you and I were working with a guy, and we were breaking out rotation.
It was Corey Pavin.
Yeah.
Former US Open champion Corey Pavin. Yep.
Okay. We were breaking him out. And the funny thing was his rotation problem in standing to the left looked like a rotation problem in sitting to the right, in quadruped to the left, and in lying to the right. And you and I looked at each other, and
even he was like, what the hell's going on?
So we're sitting here thinking, why is the SFMA being inconsistent? And it wasn't. It was telling us exactly what he was doing. And you and I, and because of your experience experience in golf, knowing those mobility bottlenecks that you see, we were trying to make his rotation problem conveniently a mobility problem, because you being a chiropractor, me being a physical therapist, know exactly what to do for that impairment. But we didn't see an impairment. We saw a pattern of inconsistency, and it landed on us both at the exact same time. Instead of trying to say what's wrong with him, the first thing we had to do is say, this is a stability problem. And there,
we remember we went to rolling. We did like 8 rolls. We got back up and he sat down. We said, let's try and turn. He turned left, he turned right. He looked at us and was like, what the hell just happened? Because it was like, it was gone.
And you know, that's the one thing that I've never really completely shared with you and Lee, but it's becoming more of a common theme. We talk about mobility more because it's easier to measure and people feel stiffness clearer. People who are unstable and need the most stability work will never ask you for stability work. They'll tell you about the tightness in their calf or how stiff their low back is, which is what's taken the hit. And you say this all the time, the problem isn't necessarily where the pain is. And so I'd say 80% of the people that come to us, if not more, have a mobility complaint, but that's one of the things that the clarity of the way we try to look at things, you know, have done. And when we try to assign an exercise to a problem, and this is one of the things I think you do well at TPI, is we don't waste exercise time. If that exercise is not transferable to a better measure, a better test, or a better skilled activity, tell me again why we're doing this with the kind of time and space we got, you know.
Well, Gray, I don't know about you, but when I went to chiropractic school, we were given, you know, tests to evaluate our players, our patients, and I got a lot of mobility tests or a lot of range of motion tests. I don't remember getting stability ones, right? Did you?
No.
I mean, it didn't, I mean, we didn't even talk about that. So you're saying, like, most people say, hey, I think I have a mobility problem. Well, that's the whole medical profession. That was the only thing we were ever looking for before too, because we didn't have a measurable tool to spot that. You know, I mean, that was, again, when we were, what year? That was probably 2004, 2005, somewhere in there. That was, you know, it almost felt like we were early explorers going, like, what the hell did we just? We don't even understand what the hell we're seeing right here. So it's definitely it's still like that. I mean, I still, you know, we teach in a lot of schools, and I think that whole world is changing a lot now. But having a differentiating tool or diagnostic tool to be able to differentiate between mobility and stability problems, which is the whole tenet of the SFMA, has been game changer.
I got a question for you on that, kind of talking about the Corey Pavin thing. When you guys are really formulating this idea in your head, everybody gets mobility, they got to have flexibility, but how do you, with everything that you've been able to do over the last, say, 10, we're going on 15 years now, how do you have that conversation with an athlete or a client to say, hey, I've got to come in and get stretched, but you know it's more of a stability issue. How do you have that conversation? Because I think that's what a lot of people struggle with. How do I get that, yeah, you think you need a better backswing, but really what you need to get is better stopping power or better stability?
Well, thanks for saying 10 years. It makes me feel younger. But I would say that I don't have the conversation. I just show them. You know what I mean? Like, listen, you can sit there and say, let me explain you. Like, just do this real quick, and then we go over and retest it. And like Corey, they're like, what the hell just happened? And you don't have to explain. You don't have to justify anything. They're like, I've been working on that, my hamstring tightness for 10 years. Now I can do David Lee Roth. What the hell just happened? And I didn't do a stretch. You know what I mean? Like when that happens, we call that the magic of the SFMA, right? And we see this in classes every time we do classes anywhere in the world. You have these people that just have been in their mind, I'm a mobility person, but it makes no sense. If you spend all day stretching, why should you be the guy with the mobility problem, right? I mean, it doesn't make sense. If the guy who never stretches doesn't have a mobility problem and the person who stretches has a mobility problem, well, then maybe it's not a mobility problem. I mean, that's maybe your first clue. But I don't spend a lot of time going, let me explain to you the neurology and what's going on. I'm just like, proof's in the pudding, man. Let's just do this. Hey, if you trust me enough to try this one little maneuver or this one little exercise or this one little treatment, let's just try it. No harm, no foul if it doesn't work, and let's see what happens. The majority of the time, it's the magic look on their face. Like, I just saw a magician. I don't know what the hell just happened, but I'm good to go. Let's go.
And you know what's funny is, you know, what you and Gray are talking about is it's that giving that person that awareness of what that should feel like. That's what's going to give you the buy-in. You don't have to explain all this stuff. Now, people in our profession too often want to explain that it's this, it's that, it's neuro, it's glute. No, you give them that awareness, and that awareness is going to get the buy-in. And that buy-in is what you're going to get long-term. That's where they're going to buy into what you're doing long-term. It's not going to be a quick fix. It's long-term. They got to keep doing it. But that awareness, if they don't have that awareness, you're not going to get that long-term adherence.
Like good movement, like we always say, like, okay, listen, drugs are addictive. Cocaine's addictive. You know what? Good movement, feeling good and being able to do stuff is addictive, right? So it's like, if every time you move, you have pain, or you can't move in this direction, it sucks. If all of a sudden somebody does something and you're like, oh my God, I can palm the ground, I can move over, this doesn't hurt, it's addictive and they want to do that. So you want to get them addicted to feeling better, to moving better, because then they'll say, okay, what do I need to do this, to feel like this every day? And you say, hey, listen, if you do these things for maybe 5 minutes a day, that'll keep the doctor away. It's that simple.
Yep. And let me throw out a statement, and you guys can both comment to it. We've been in the sort of movement and global testing part of movement for a long time. There are a lot of local tests, but they're the global test where we engage multiple body parts, multiple segments, and watch you move. And one of the things that's just forming as a mantra when I'm working with people that are just dipping their toe into a different way of looking at movement, I say, listen, it's real easy to spot a mobility problem because you consistently can't get into a position. Stability problems, if you can consistently get into a position but your transitions look bad, that's usually a stability problem. And so the funny thing is, and I know you guys use it too, the toe touch progression. It's one of our global movements. Now, you and I can both say, I could use that for mobility and stability, because if lumbopelvic rhythm is out, we get a chance to regain that rhythm by the way we create the obstacle. Toes up, toes down, don't bend your back yet, now go down. Or we could get mobility. And that really confuses people how we would use the exact same maneuver for somebody who has an asymmetry, somebody who has an obvious stability problem, obvious mobility problem, not realizing that we're using balance when they're standing up or mobility when they're going down to work the same thing. But really, a toe touch progression is combining a couple of positions and a couple of transitions. And so one part of the exercise is scrubbing you harder than the other part. But that bothers people because they want to go to this Rolodex of, I need a glute medius stability exercise. And I'm like, I wish it worked that way for you, but that's not the way the human body learns to move. We find that worst pattern, realizing that there's some mobility and stability issues. We find the bottleneck. If we have to do something heroic locally, we do. We step back and make you work through it. We don't tell you how to do the corrective moves. We make you work through it. And in that struggle comes your awareness, and our feedback loop pays in, because by you laying down a test, by us doing screens first, whatever, that's some transparency, right? We're completely transparent.
Is there a question in here? Because he said, Greg, he said, I'm going to get you guys to comment on this. I don't even know what he's talking about now.
It's the simple thing. The positions tell us if you got a mobility problem, but it's those wobbly transitions that we've come full circle, and we do.
Well, I think the big thing you're hitting on is this local versus global type of testing. On like local. All right, listen. If somebody stabs you, or you get shot with a gun, or you somebody tears one fiber, I get it. You should work on that knife wound. That's local. But anything else, I think we're starting to realize, like you just said, is your body, you didn't pop out of your mom's womb and said, all right, today's bis and tris, and tomorrow is glutes and hams. You're using your entire body every time you do everything, and you should evaluate it that way.
Greg, how do you approach this when you do have your guys, your golfers, your pro golfers coming in? And because I think that's what a lot of people know you for when they come in. I mean, you follow the same recipe pretty much with what. Yeah, well,
let me tell you. I'll tell you what we do. That's maybe a little different, but so it doesn't matter if it's a golfer, a baseball player, a tennis player. It doesn't matter. When an athlete comes in, first thing we do, if you come into TPI, first thing we do is we sit down in our conference room and we start with a little interview, and we just say, how can we help you? Because you never know why people are there. They all have different opinions on why they're there. It could be for health, could be for performance, whatever. We get that out of the way. By the way, it doesn't matter what you say. We're still going to go through the same evaluation after, but I always like to know why you're there. Then we go through collecting the information. And the information we collect is simple. So the first thing we do is we go check out physical. So we wanted to know what you can physically do. And ideally, most athletes are coming to us not because of pain. Even if they are injured, they're coming because they want to play better. One of the reasons they might not be playing better is because they're hurt, but the goal is to play better, right? So the first thing we do is we're going to go check out to see if there's anything in your body that's going to be preventing you from playing better or potentially leading to injury. So to do that, we have to do two things. We do a movement screen first, which obviously we do the FMS on everybody. If they're injured already, then we do the SFMA, right? So we do either of our movement screens first just to see their basic movements, basic function. Then we do a sport-specific movement screen. So if we say, okay, what are you? You're a golfer. Okay, we do our TPI screen. If you're a baseball player, we do our on-base screen. You're a tennis player, we do our racket fit screen. And the sport-specific screen is going to pick up any of the, let's say, the specific movements to that sport that will help us understand why they move the way they move. So in other words, like, let's take, for example, golf, wrist motions, right? So it's very important to be able to hinge and set and release the golf club in certain directions that allows you to optimize velocity and make sure you get center face, square face contact. And I want to know, do you have those motions? Because the thing about movement screening, I always say this, is movement screening doesn't tell me what you can and can't do. It just helps me explain why you do it that way, right? Which is really important because I want to know why are you doing it this way? And especially if your coach is trying to yell at you like, hey, stop swaying with your lower body too much to the right. Well, you should ask yourself is why are they doing that? Now, it could be a technical problem, but it could be a movement problem, right? So we do the FMS or SFMA to get the basic movement patterns, and then we go look for the sport-specific movement patterns with our sport-specific screens, like hip to shoulder separation, wrist motions, things like like front side stability, backside loading, some of the specific movements that help us predict what you'll do when you throw a ball, strike a bat, swing a golf club. Now, if you have those two pieces of information, if you have your basic thumbprint of here's how you move, your basic thumbprint of here's how you're probably going to move when you try this sport, you can get pretty deadly at understanding why they move the way they move. Then we take them out onto the turf or onto the cage, wherever we go, and whatever the activities, and we're going to film them. We do two types of filming. We do high-speed video, and honestly, the best high-speed video on the market right now is your iPhone, right? I mean, 240 frames per second is usually plenty enough for any athlete now. So we get the video from multiple angles, and then we hook them up under some type of motion capture system. We have 9 different types of motion capture systems. So we get this 3-dimensional model of the player. And that allows us to really look to see what their movements look like when they actually do their sport. Because obviously, like with pitching, if you're going to check external rotation, as you know, like standing here, if I just do this standing, first of all, that's going to be different than laying prone, which will be different than supine because of all the different stability differences. But just because you can move this far statically doesn't mean you're not going to pick up 20, 30 degrees when you actually throw dynamically off a mound. So I like to go see now, what do you do when you actually do your sport? And then if we see some of these deficiencies or some of these issues in the sport, and we saw the same deficiencies in the base movement screen or the sport-specific movement screen, well, now we have a body-sport connection. And if we have this body-sport connection, that becomes the primary focus of our attack plan.
What you just described is literally putting somebody under a microscope, so to speak, right? So a lot of the athletes at that level, they may rely on some of those movement issues, some of those asymmetries in the body, some of the things, because obviously the way you just described everything you're looking at, you're going to find something. You're going to find something, right?
It's very rare that we don't find something.
Yeah. So you're always going to probably find something, but how do you determine if they're not relying on that tightness or stability to do what they do so well?
Yeah, so there's two big pieces there. So first thing you always got to remember is that there are advantageous asymmetries in professional sports or at the elite of any level. Like we talked about pitching or in golf, it's very much like overhead throwing athlete. They're going to have skewed external rotation to internal rotation. Like we always, Eric Cressy and I were doing a podcast last week on baseball, and we were talking about GERD. Everybody talks about this glenohumeral internal rotation deficit. We're like, well, if you're a pitcher, you should have GERD, right? You should be skewed towards external rotation. That's normal. That's not a problem. Now, if it gets excessive, that becomes a problem. So, like, I think, and Gray, I might be quoting you wrong here, but I know, we do, obviously, FMS. We have a station at the NFL Combine, and I've worked with a couple of the quarterback combines, and they try and pass every test, right? They're like, if we're going to go to the combine, we want to kick ass and we want to get everything perfect. But I'm pretty sure if they came in and got a 21 on our FMS and they were a quarterback, if you ask me, I'd be saying there's something wrong because they should have some type of asymmetry in that shoulder, or there are certain asymmetries that we look for that are advantageous, right? So would you agree with that, Gray?
No, I would, because, and I think one of the ways that we talk about the slippery slope of asymmetry is if you're at that level and don't have an asymmetry, you're not training in your skill pocket enough. Right. If you're 13 years old aspiring to be a quarterback, the best way to adapt to that position is come with as much mobility and stability in a healthy way as you have. So we don't want to train you into it.
Yeah, you're bringing up how do you get that asymmetry? And I think this is what we tell our kids this all the time too is, we'll look at that asymmetry. I call it, I call it the medal bracket or the jacket bracket, right? For golf, we call it the jacket bracket. I'll tell you a true story. Okay, so I was asked to go in and work with the Chinese Federation table tennis team. And I'm like, listen, I don't know anything about table tennis. I was out in Beijing and they were like, doesn't matter. We've been using your golf screen with our athletes for over 10 years. And I'm like, our golf screen? So now I'm intrigued. So I go in and first of all, we meet the team out on the track because they're training them like they're professional athletes, which they are. I didn't realize they hadn't lost a gold medal in like 30 years. And so, but it's amazing. They're training them. We go into the table tennis arena and it's, 100 tables. It's an amazing place. And we sit down, we walk into a room. I don't know if I'm supposed to be saying this publicly, but I'm going to say it anyway. So we walk into a room.
Nobody's listening, Greg.
Nobody's listening. So we walk into a room and there's 4 American trainers that I see that I know from a certain company that I won't name, but I see them and I'm like, hey, what's up? And I go to say hi, and the director there goes, hey, would you mind not talking to them until we had our conversation? And I was like, okay, that's kind of weird, but they asked me to sit down at a table, and they have the American trainers on the left side of the table. They have the whole Chinese coaches and trainers and medicals on the right side. I sit down at the head of the table, and this director comes in and says, Dr. Rose, if you don't mind, we're going to ask you a bunch of questions. Thanks for coming in. And it's getting awkward in the room. And and the guy goes, all right, he goes, so first and foremost, he goes, thanks for coming in. I'd like to show you some of the data from our first team for China here for table tennis. I'd like to show you some of the movement screening and like to get your opinion on it. And I'm like, okay. So he puts 8 pieces of paper in front of me, and it's 8 FMSs, right? So it's got all the FMS screens. And he's like, these are our 8 players. Would you mind taking a look at this? And I kind of look at it. And it's like one guy's like a 14, one guy's a 15, one guy's a 14, one guy's a 16, there's a 15, there's a 14. It was all between like 14 and 16, right? And he goes, okay, do you have it? And I'm like, do I have it? Like, I don't have this memorized. He's like, but you've seen it. I'm like, yeah, I've seen it. And he takes them away. Then he puts 8 TPI, golf screens, in front of me. He goes, these are the same 8 guys with their golf screen. Take a look at it. I'm like, all right. So I look at the golf screen. No way I'm going to remember any of this crap, right? So they take it away, and he goes, all right. He goes, I have one more. And I'm like, okay. And he puts 8 more pieces of paper, and it's 8 FMSs again. I look down and I go, okay. And I go, what's this? And he goes, so the first FMS scores we showed you was 18 months ago. He goes, and you saw those scores? I'm like, yes. He goes, this was last week, and I want your opinion. And I look at it, and it looks similar, 14s, 15s, 16s over there. And he goes, do you see any difference? And I go, well, first of all, I don't really remember like exactly the ones before. I go, if you put them here together, I can they're like, but do you notice a huge difference? I go, I don't notice a huge difference. And he goes, that's our problem. He goes, we hired these guys 18 months ago, right? He goes, I see the same results. Why are we paying them? That was his first question. Right? It got like dead silent in the room, right? And I go, so to me, the question didn't even make sense. So I said, so hold on a second. I go, do you guys understand like what this is telling you, what this information is telling you? I said, because potentially this is what it's telling you, right? Potentially you just told me that the medal bracket for table tennis is somewhere between 14 and 16. Not saying it is, but maybe 15 and 16 would identify certain asymmetries, advantageous asymmetries that all the greatest table tennis players in the world have, and that we should try and keep them in that sweet spot. And I go, and one of the hardest things in the world to do in training is keep people in that bracket, because like you said, Greg, listen, if you practice, all you do is practice, your asymmetries tend to get bigger and bigger, and your score drops below the bracket. If all you do is train with your therapist or your trainer, then your asymmetries tend to go away and it goes above the bracket. To have the proper volume of practice and training is the secret to elite sports, and to keep you in that bracket is the secret. I said, so first thing is, number one is you shouldn't tell people the bracket if you're trying to be, the best in the world. And number two is keeping them in that bracket is the hardest thing in the world. I'm like, they should get a raise. And the guy looked at me and just gave me thumbs up with a big smile.
It's easy to assume the goal of a movement screen is to get a perfect score, but one of the ways that I help people reconcile the big asymmetry debate that doesn't ever seem to be a problem when the three of us talk is the fact that we've seen a lot of NFL quarterbacks. And usually the very first time we see them with this new perspective, we see what we would call a dysfunction on one shoulder and function or better than average function on the other. Basically what I'm saying is they got a 1 on their non-throwing side, or they got a 1 basically somewhere. And what we say is, listen, you're supposed to have asymmetry, but neither of those moves should be dysfunctional, meaning you can have a great mobility on one side and average on the other, but we don't want to see the deficit. So what we see with a lot of our throwers is they go from like a 1-2 or a 1-3 asymmetry to a 2-3 asymmetry. And the other thing we often see when we see a huge asymmetry is when the side that's measured less gets better, the side that measured great gets a little worse, meaning we're borrowing tissue. We're not making more tissue in one area. We're always pulling you back to the center of your spine, your pelvis, or your shoulder girdle. And that has a leveling effect. And then we've got the bony asymmetries, but usually what we look for in a movement screen is, as long as we're getting those numbers and we don't have a 1 anywhere, or we don't have multiple ones, that's where you're leaning on something that won't be sustainable.
And let me make it really clear too, is if you do come up with like a bracket and you say, okay, quarterback should be an 18, remember, you can get to 18 a million different ways. So it's not about the score, it's how you got that score.
That's right.
Right. So it's which patterns should be a 3-2 is what's really important.
Yeah, but that's just one piece, right, Greg? I mean, I like the way you frame it up, and literally in a frame or you're giving guardrails. What's the guardrails? And then at anything you're looking at, I'm assuming you have those brackets in there to say, with the experience you've got, I know professional golfers, I got to keep them between this line and this line.
Right. I mean, that's what so many people say to me, like, hey, I work with MMA. What should it be in MMA? I'm like, well, if you work in a sport, if you work in water polo, you should start screening your best players, right? Get the best players. And I'm telling you, you're going to start seeing some themes. If there are advantageous asymmetries for that sport, you're going to pick them up pretty quick. And then instead of saying, hey, this is a problem, just always be aware that sometimes in elite sports, remember, if you're just an accountant or attorney or a secretary, you should be balanced, right? I'm talking the elite of the elite. The elite of the elite, just because of the volumes of practice and stuff you're doing, I think that it's something to look for. Always be on the look for.
And how do you manage that rest time? I mean, what's your advice to some of your guys to? Because that's the key component. What I'm hearing you really say is
rest. What's rest?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the whole thing. Is you let them go. They're going to go out and practice.
I think I work in the two worst sports for rest. I mean, let's talk. First of all, Major League Baseball. I think 100, well, not this year, but normally 160 some games in like 180 days. I mean, it's like there is no rest time. And on the PGA Tour, if you think about the PGA Tour, we now have 1 month off. We have December off, right? It's year round. So they have 11 months a year. Most guys will travel either late Sunday night or Monday, right? So let's say Monday, they travel Monday morning. They will practice on Tuesday. They play the Pro-Am on Wednesday. If they're good, they play Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then they start again. They do this for 11 months, right? So it's recovery is a nightmare for these sports. So things like periodization of training, all that goes out the window. You can't do that when you have a nonstop here. So recovery to me is and measuring rest, like you said. Number one is I like to know like what my maximum speeds should be, right? Like, for example, let's say you're a pitcher, right? It always cracks me up with a lot of teams say, all right, go in the bullpen and go warm up. And I'm like, well, how many throws should they throw to warm up? Most pitchers will be like, I don't know, I just kind of throw. And I'm like, well, all those are pitch counts, right? Those are all counting, right? What we do is we count from what we call ramp time. Like if you're a world long drive competitor, I want to know how many swings does it take for you to get to your maximum speed? And then I want to know how long you can maintain that maximum speed, because that helps me understand how to prep and warm you up for your sport. So if I'm a pitcher, I want to know, like, if I'm warming up, how many throws do I need to go until I can reach my maximum speed? If my maximum speed is 95 miles an hour and it takes me 10 balls to get to 95, I'm going to throw light. And then when they say you're about to come in 2 minutes, I'm like, all right, that gives me 10 balls to get up to my speed. And then if I know, hey, I've got 65, 70 pitches that I can keep it at 95, at least I know when I'm done, and fastball's not an option anymore, right? Same thing, like I said, with golf, is I like to do this. Now, if I know it takes me 10 balls to get to 95 miles an hour normally, if I show up today and I'm like, all right, let's go practice, and I've got the radar gun there, and I get to 10 balls and I'm still at 90, and I throw again, I'm like at 91, and I'm like, what the hell's going on? Today's not the day. I need some recovery. Like, I'm just not recovered. It's like my nervous system isn't there yet. So I like having some type of indicator. There are different other ways that you can check, from counter movement jumps. A lot of people do some of these things to test to see where you're at. But if a lot of people are like, I want to set my training, so I do power on Monday and Friday. I'm like, well, how do you know Monday and Friday are the day for you? I mean, what happens Sunday night or Thursday can influence, and you should only do it on the days that you're fresh. So that's first thing. And if you're consistently seeing your numbers are going down, you obviously aren't getting enough recovery. So now the types of recovery out there, people are always asking us, what's the best recovery? By far, and I don't know anything that comes close to this, is sleep. I mean, that's number one, right? And it's amazing on how many people they try they're in hyperbaric oxygen chambers, they're doing, infrared light and pulsed electromagnetic frequencies, and they're doing cryotherapy chambers, and they sleep 4 hours a night. I'm like, none of that shit's gonna matter if you don't get some sleep, right? That's number one, is you gotta get sleep time. And being able to plan that in with these players that are traveling all the time is extremely difficult.
One thing you mentioned right there, Greg, I want to dive into a little deeper and get both you guys' takes is talking to some other guys. And I think this is a really practical way to take away recovery that a lot of some of these pro strength coaches use. And that's just simple grip strength. If you got a standard grip strength, if your grip strength is down significantly the day after or 2 or 3 days after, then they're not recovered. But that goes back to what you touched on, and that goes back to the neurological system. And the neurological system is really what you've got to monitor, not so much everybody's thinking muscle and this and that, but the neurological system is really what's got to kind of.
Well, it's funny you say it's like in baseball, a lot of people are doing these weighted balls now, right? So weighted balls and lightweight balls, and there's all kinds of controversy. And I was just doing a podcast 2 days ago with Tom House, one of the guys who kind of founded all this, and we were talking about the neurological system. There is one of the things that's really interesting in training for sports is a lot of people think like, well, if I'm a pitcher, I got to throw weighted balls, these lightweight and heavyweight ones, to build pitching velocity. But that's not true. We actually have found that if you take your pitchers and you do swinging like bats or sprinting forward or backwards, if you just get the nervous system to move faster, when they pitch, it's faster. And it's actually safer because you're not going against your pitch counts. You can train outside of that. So the key, like you said, is it's all about the neurological system. It's not about the sport-specific movement. We just want to get your neurological system to pop faster. So number one is I like training outside of my sport because then again, it doesn't mess with my technique. It doesn't count towards my volumes. Number two is it helps get the nervous system moving. But like you just measured, it doesn't matter. You can test the nervous system any way you want. If the nervous system's down, it's down across the board, and you need recovery.
That's one of the things. That's one of the things that talking to you and talking to guys like John Tureen in pro sports, one of the things I think you guys do, and you did it naturally, anytime you get a new test, you use it to establish a baseline, but then you also use it as an indicator for a state of readiness once the baseline is indicated. So just like we've learned from some military stuff that Kyle and Phil have done that have given us information, lack of sleep and dehydration influence your balance test and movement screen as much as anything. And so once we get those baselines, and once you use the way you use it for feedback, the way we use the SFMA for feedback, you realize if questioning the state of readiness is sometimes better than issuing a corrective. Because if we simply achieve a little bit more homeostasis on something that's not movement, we may have a ripple effect in movement. But when we start messing with movement too quickly, it ceases to be a nonverbal indicator of state of readiness. And so many people on a sleep survey will tell you, but on a balance survey will tell you no. And then all of a sudden you engineer a better sleep night, balance goes up without practice. You now have a great argument for state of readiness that has nothing to do with your corrective exercise. It's got to do with what are you bringing, what state of neurological awareness are you bringing to the situation today?
Yeah, and Lee, I'm going to go back to something you said before, earlier question you said when we got into these asymmetries. You said, how do you know if this movement issue is a problem? And I said, well, number one was, hey, we understand that there's these advantageous asymmetries. The second thing we always do is we look at, like I told you, we do motion capture on our players. A lot of people ask, like, why do you do motion capture? Well, with motion capture, with 3D motion capture, we now can actually look at how players generate power and how they transfer power through their body. It's called the kinematic sequence, and a lot of people in sports have seen this. And it's really, there's like a signature that the best athletes in each sport, whether you're a quarterback, whether you're a golfer, a tennis player, of how they create power and how they transfer power through their body. And so one of the things I always say is, like, even if their movements look really weird, if they still have that good athletic signature, we're all in. I'm in. I want to do it. I just want to make sure it doesn't break down. And with that athletic signature, not only can I see the timing, the sequencing, the amount of energy you're going, but I can also see some of the things we're talking about right now where it's like, hey, your signature's off today. Like, there's something weird here. Like, what's going on? And that could also be a sign of, hey, recovery or injury. You know, one of the biggest things to screw up your signature is an injury, right? Like, I'll tell you a story. Peter Jacobsen, who's one of the, PGA Tour player forever, Champions Tour player now. Peter came into TPI like 2008 and was like, Greg, I need help. He goes, I've got to last till September, but then I'm getting my hip replaced. And I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, my left hip's so bad. I've got my scheduled surgery September. He goes, but I'm in so much pain right now, but I've got to play. And this was like, I want to say it was like May. And I'm like, what do you mean you have to play? And he's like, well, I'm now also a host of some of these tournaments. And it's just going to look bad if I'm not there. So I've made my surgery in September. You got to get me these 5 or 6 months. And I'm like, okay. And Peter had been at TPI a million times. It's a perfect signature. So I'm like, well, let's see what we can do to try and stop your pain. So I hook him up under motion capture and he swings and I look at the signature and it's horrible. I mean, it's all screwed up. And I look at this and I'm like, Peter, how bad is this right now? He's like, it's pretty bad. And I'm like, I can see. I go, because I go, all right, come over here, sit down. So we sit down and I go, let me show you before, right? And I show him how good his signature is. It looks like he's cracking the whip when he swings. I go, let me show you now. And even he said, he goes, wow, that's totally different. I said, you're right. I go, so here's the deal. I go, something you have to understand is that motor patterns, like, when you develop a swing or motor pattern, they're like books on a shelf in your brain. And you can make as many of these books as you want. But the research is really clear is once you make one of these, you can't get rid of them, right? You can make new ones, but you're always going to have these bad ones. So when you get a bad habit, you can't get rid of a bad habit. You can just add new, better habits. But, so I'm like, I want you to know is you have a great book for a golf swing right now. I go, but I'm pretty confident right now, every time you swing, you're writing a new book. And if you write that new book and you play with it for the next 5 months, I go, not only will that book be permanent, I go, but when you get the surgery and you get this hip replaced and you come back, I'm not sure which book your brain's going to pick. It might pick the bad one instead of the good one. I go, so my advice to you is we should be doing surgery next week. Screw the next 5 months. No tournament is worth writing a bad book. And he actually did push up his surgery. So I love having this type of technology too, to not only look at, the neurological system, but to look to see of how like pain alters the way these players move. And it's amazing on how quickly pain can create these altered patterns in their sport.
So what is the craziest golf shot you guys have ever seen on the course?
So Greg, I want to tell you mine and then you show me yours. Not technically, figuratively, but a few weeks ago, I was playing golf with some buddies of mine. Craziest thing I've ever seen. And unfortunately it involved me. I'm standing, my buddy's in the bunker. I know it's gonna be hard to kind of picture this in your head, but he's in the bunker and I'm standing directly, 90 degrees to him. And he was hitting it on the green. So I'm standing off the green. My buddy's other guy standing off the green, wait for him to hit. And we're just looking at the flag, wait for him to hit. And we're probably 20 yards away, but we're way away from him. He toes it. He hits it off the end of the club. And it goes straight to me, ricochets off of my right hip, ricocheted off my left knee, goes on the green and about a foot away from the hole.
That's the best way to play it.
Yep.
That's it.
So what have you seen or been involved with there, Rose?
Well, that's amateur, Lee, as always. So I will show you the professional version of that. So I was probably 20 years old. I was in Green Lake, Maine, camping and got asked to go play golf that day. And I was like, I had my golf clubs and I was like, man, I've never played this golf course.
You took your golf clubs camping?
That's the takeaway.
A real golf, Lee. A real golf,
take their golf clubs
with them. Okay, so
there's a bear. I forgot my gun, but I got a putter.
Exactly. This story gets better.
That's the end of the story.
So I'm there with my girlfriend and her family, and I'm like, hey, listen, I gotta go practice. But we're in the middle of the woods, so I grab my golf clubs and I'm like, I know there's a clearing like 300 yards through the woods. So I start walking through the woods, and I get like maybe 50 feet from this cabin, and all of a sudden I see this net hanging between two trees. I'm like, it looks like a fishing net. I'm like, no freaking way, there's like a net here. And I'm like, all I gotta do is move some of the leaves out of the way, get some of the logs out of the way, and I can hit into this net. So I move the leaves away, I put a ball down, I take a driver out, and I hit it into the net, and the bottom of the net flies up, and the ball goes flying through the net. And I'm like, damn, I got to weigh this net down. So I go get a log, and I put a log at the bottom of the net to hold it down, the bottom part down. I tee up the next ball, and I hit. Now, the next thing I remember, okay, is I'm laying down in this forest, right? I open my eyes.
I like how he says forest, and there's a golf course right next to it.
No, so I'm in the forest by this cabin. I look up and I'm like, where am I? I'm like, I don't understand. Like, why am I laying on the ground? I look over and I see my driver on the ground. I'm like, why is my driver there? And I kind of get up. I literally have no idea where I am. I turn around, I see the cabin. I start walking back towards the cabin. I get to the cabin. All of a sudden, the door opens, and it's the girlfriend's mom. Looks at me and starts screaming. And I'm like, what the hell's going on? I think she thought I got attacked by a bear because there was no skin. It was just blood everywhere. The ball, I guess, hit the log, came back, hit me dead square in the forehead, knocked me clear out. When I woke up, I just was covered in blood, and maybe an hour later, I was getting stitches in the hospital. So that definitely beats your hip knee story.
It does, but still the takeaway is I'm going camping, and I'm taking my clubs. It was a golf course.
Real golfers bring their golf clubs with them.
Well,
Chatham, that's a
I don't know if you
story.
go camping where really close by there's a golf course.
Yeah.
Everywhere, Lee. Come on, dude. There's a golf course everywhere. And just to end on the point, that was the fourth concussion that I've had playing golf.
Now everything became more clear right there.
I don't think I can play golf anymore. If I get another concussion, I'm out. So I'm sidelined.
Right. That's great, Greg. Thanks so much for joining us. Great insight. Really appreciate it.
See you in the orchard.
You got it, buddy. On the tractor.
Yeah, man.
All right, boys. Peace.
Thanks, Greg. See you, buddy.
See you, man.
That'll do it for this episode of the Movement Podcast. Thanks for listening. And if you liked what you heard, please subscribe and share it with your friends and family. If you want to learn more about our system and take the next step in your movement journey, visit us at functionalmovement.com. Until next time, be sure to move well, move often.